All right, we're going to talk about three possible solutions to the paradox of identity, the ship of Theseus paradox. As with all of the paradoxes that we've looked at and will look at, the paradox arises from a contradiction in the conclusion. So, because the argument's valid, to avoid the contradiction, you got to reject at least one of the premises. And these solutions are distinguished by which premise they reject. So here's the first solution. Maybe premise one is false. And remember, premise one says that the original ship is numerically identical with the maintained ship. Now, I gave a defense of that claim in the video, and the thought is just that, look, material objects can survive the change and loss of some of their parts. One single removal of a single plank from the original ship, and if it's replaced with a new plank, it's still the same ship. So successive replacement, if it's done carefully, maintains the numerical identity of the ship. That was the defense of the first premise. The first solution says that that's all wrong. In fact, material objects in general can't survive the loss or addition of any of their parts. This is a metaphysical view sometimes known as mereological essentialism. According to mereological essentialism, when Theseus removes that first plank from the original ship, it is no longer the original ship. He's got a new ship in front of him. And more generally, remove any part from any material object, and that object ceases to exist. Now, that's super counterintuitive for ships, but it gets worse. Presumably, you and I are material objects as well, or at least we seem to be. We seem to be human organisms of biological kind, Homo sapien. So we, just like ships and tables and chairs and plants and animals, we're made up of physical parts. So if mereological essentialism is true, then as soon as I lose a single one of my physical parts, I no longer exist. So I don't know, maybe don't go get your hair cut because you might die, is what mereological essentialism implies. And that seems wrong, right? I mean, our theory of persons and our philosophy of persons shouldn't have the implication that haircuts are murder, but that's a problem for the mereological essentialist. Here's the second possible solution. Second possible solution is to deny both 1 and 2. It's neither the case that the original ship is numerically identical with the maintained ship, nor is it the case that the original ship is numerically identical with the rotten ship. Now, to see why this is supposed to be plausible as a solution to this paradox, we need to introduce a view. The view is four-dimensionalism. Four-dimensionalism is a view about the nature of material objects. According to four-dimensionalism, composite material objects, again, like ships and tables and chairs and trees and dogs and everything else that's made up of physical parts, these things are stretched out not just through space, right? They don't just have spatial locations and spatial extension. Objects also have a temporal extension. So just as I have, in particular, just as I have one of my physical parts, my left hand, is located right now on the keyboard, and I've got a different physical part, my right hand, which is located on the mouse. So in some sense, I'm located partly in two different physical spatial locations. Four-dimensionalism says, in that same sense, I also have different temporal parts. I have a today temporal part. I have a yesterday temporal part. I have a 5 years ago temporal part. And if I'm lucky, I'll have a 50 years hence temporal part. What am I on four-dimensionalism? I'm what's sometimes called space-time worm. I'm this long spatiotemporal object that has both spatial and temporal parts that takes up the entirety of my lifespan. I'm not any one of the individual temporal parts. I'm the entire object. Now, back to the ship of Theseus. How does this help? Well, if four-dimensionalism is true, then the original ship is not identical with either the maintained ship or the rotten ship. Instead, the original ship has one temporal part, the maintained ship, and a different temporal part, the rotten ship. But just as I'm not numerically identical with either of my hands, they're parts of me, but I'm not identical with them. Likewise, the original ship is not identical with either the maintained ship or the rotten ship, but merely has them as its temporal parts. So this allows us to reject both 1 and 2 and gives us a clean way of rejecting the paradox, which is nice. However, there is, of course, a downside. And I mentioned that on four-dimensionalism, I have temporal parts, at least if I'm a material thing. So do you. So does Theseus. So do all persons. Now, I might begin to wonder, and you might begin to wonder, if I'm this big four-dimensional space-time worm, right now, am I the thing experiencing the sound of the logic video being played before me? Am I the one who is taking in the visual experience of these surroundings? Maybe you're in a room or an office. Is the thing that's experiencing the conscious experiences and having the thoughts that you're having right now, is that thing the space-time worm, the whole, or is it one of the individual temporal parts? Because those are numerically distinct. But it seems like they're both thinking, right? In fact, it seems like they're both thinking the same thoughts. One of the temporal parts, the one right now, is thinking, wow, this stuff is weird. But then the entire space-time worm is thinking, wow, this stuff is weird as well. Well, which one are you? Are you the whole big space-time worm, or are you one of the temporal parts? Seems like there'd be no way for you to tell which one you are. That's a little puzzling and lands us in another problem for this theory of what this theory of what material objects are has a puzzling implication for what human beings are. So this solution, while it solves the paradox, introduces new problems of its own. Here's solution 3. Perhaps at this point, maybe this is going to start looking like the most attractive solution. Maybe what we should do is agree that if there were such things as ships, then a contradiction would follow. If there were such things as ships, in particular, if there were such a thing as the original ship and the maintained ship and the rotten ship, then indeed the rotten ship would be both identical with the maintained ship and not identical with the maintained ship. Maybe what this paradox shows, though, is that this is just a reason to not believe that there is any such thing as the rotten ship or the maintained ship or the original ship. And more generally, this is a reason to think that there just are no such things as ships. Even more generally, there are no such things as any composite material objects. No tables, no chairs, no blankets. I'm sitting on a couch. No couches, no houses. Now, this isn't quite as radical as it seems, because on this view, which is sometimes called eliminativism about material objects, there are, of course, still atomic symbols and microphysical entities that are stand in causal relations to one another and stand in various spatial relations to one another in such a way that those very small microphysical particles give you the appearance as of looking at a ship, or gives Theseus that visual appearance. But ultimately, it's just the physical symbols that are the things causing him to have the perceptual experience as of a ship, and then to say, look, there's a ship. Strictly speaking, on eliminativism, he's wrong. What there are just symbols arranged shipwise. There's no additional thing. There's no ship. Of course, maybe you can see where this is going. If eliminativism is true and we're material objects, does that mean that there is no such thing as me, but instead just some symbols arranged Jonathan Barker wise? I don't know. Different eliminativists say different things about persons. My advisor is an eliminativist, and my dissertation advisor, and he wrote a whole book on this. He thinks we exist. I think that feels like cheating. But if he were here, he would have a lot of convincing things to say, but he's not. So I will end there. This stuff is metaphysics. This is what I do. The stuff that got me interested in philosophy in the first place. If you are interested in this stuff, I'd love to talk about it sometime. Otherwise, take care until next week. Talk to you then.